From the towering forests of the Pacific Northwest to the swamps of the Deep South, did you know that every state in the USA has its own mysterious cryptid that haunts local folklore? Today, we're going on a road trip across America, but not the kind that you'd find on any map. We're diving into the shadows, where legends live and the unexplained roams free. This is an exploration into the top cryptids of each state in the US. Now, I've covered a lot of these before on my social media feeds, so this is going to be a kind of compilation of all of it together into one new epic video, with a couple new ones thrown into the mix. And then we'll circle back to some of the craziest cryptids at the end, so make sure to stick around. And before I get started, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and hit the bell icon below so you never miss a new video. And with that said, buckle up because this is going to be a wild and fun ride through the United States of cryptids. First up is Maine. Now, Maine has a massive amount of untouched wilderness, 33,000 square miles worth of it, which includes places like the Acadia National Park or the Debsconiag Lakes Wilderness area, where many things could potentially be hiding. It's said in these remote woods there was a creature that was as elusive as it was enormous, the specter moose. Now, the specter moose is often seen as a harbinger of bad luck, with those who encounter it often facing misfortune or injury. It was first spotted in 1891 near Lobster Lake by a hunting guide. It was basically described as this massive, ghostly white moose. Now, moose are already large, but this creature was on a whole other level. It was otherworldly in size, and apparently had the ability to disappear into thin air. In one sighting, a hunter named Howard Van Ness saw the specter moose and fired 2 slugs at it, which did nothing. It then charged at Howard, and as far as we know, Howard must have escaped because he lived to tell the tale. Since the late 1800s, it's been sporadically seen, though at this point most think that if it was real, it likely died of old age by this point, but some believe it could still be lurking out in the most remote regions of Maine. While some believe that the specter moose was just a rare albino moose of the species, others think that there was something supernatural about it and that it might still haunt the forests of Maine. And I think that the specter moose is a reminder that the wilderness can hold secrets that we may never fully understand. Next up is New Hampshire. In Coos County, the northernmost county in New Hampshire, local legend says that there are some mysterious creatures lurking there, and they're known as the wood devils. These wood devils are described as tall and thin humanoid creatures which are covered in this grayish hair, and they stand over 7 to 9 feet tall. Think of them like a skinny Bigfoot. Now, according to the stories, the wood devils are said to be incredibly fast and also very much elusive. It's said if you're hiking out in the woods, many witnesses have described these things peeking out from behind trees or even standing completely still if they see you coming. It's kind of a way that they try to camouflage in with the surroundings, and they appear tree-like to avoid being detected. And then once they find an opportunity, they'll vanish from the area with lightning speed before anyone can even get a good look at them. The legend of these wood devils dates back to the early 1930s at the very least, with numerous sightings reported by hunters and hikers who either caught a quick glimpse of something watching them from behind a tree or hearing their screams off in the distance. Now, like I mentioned previously, some believe that wood devils are basically a subtype of Bigfoot, while others think that there's something far more mysterious about them, kind of like the hide behind. The legend of the wood devils is, again, it's a reminder that even in the most remote, tranquil forest settings, there can be something strange that's lurking just out of sight. Moving over to Vermont, we've got some pretty creepy creatures and legends here. One of the most well-known comes from the small town of Northfield, where it's said that a creature that's as terrifying as it is mysterious resides. This is the story of the Northfield Pigman. Now, the Pigman is described as this large humanoid figure with the head of a pig, the body of a man that's covered in white fur, and was often seen lurking in the woods around Moortown Mountain, specifically near Devil's Washbowl Road, digging into people's trash bins in the middle of the night or slaughtering livestock on local farms. So this story actually dates back to the 1950s when a local teenager named Sam Harris went missing on Cabbage Night, or the day before Halloween. Now, Sam Harris had this reputation of being cruel to animals, especially pigs, and despite there being a search effort to locate Sam, he was reportedly never found. Decades later, in the 1970s, during a dance at Northfield High School, some students were hiding out back drinking and smoking, and they suddenly saw this pigman creature burst out of the woods. Now, this terrified the unsuspecting teens, of course. They ran back to the gym to get help and wound up rounding up this posse of brave youths. But by the time that they got back outside, the pigman was long gone. Now, this case continues to be mysterious, and over the years, some have theorized that Sam Harris may have been the true identity of the pigman. Perhaps he got lost in the woods around Moortown Mountain and became feral, or there's some that think that he may have made a deal with the devil, which turned him into this pigman creature. And to this day, we still don't know if it was just an urban legend, or if there was some creature really lurking around Northfield, Vermont. Next up is Massachusetts. Now, between April 21st and April 22nd in 1977, the small town of Dover, Massachusetts became the site of one of the most unusual cryptid sightings in history. This is the story of the Dover Demon. Over the course of these 2 nights, several teenagers reported encountering a small humanoid creature that had these large orange glowing eyes, pale skin, and long spindly limbs and fingers. The first sighting happened around 10:30 p.m. on April 21st when then 17-year-old Bill Bartlett and his buddies were driving down Farm Street when he saw this weird creature scaling across an old stone wall on the side of the road, and as they passed by, Bill could see it turning its head to observe them. Later that night, around midnight, another teenager in town, John Baxter, was walking home from his girlfriend's house, and as he strolled down a dark street on the way home, he could see this small shadowy figure walking towards him. He thought it might have been a person or someone he knew, so he called out to it multiple times and got no response. Suddenly, the figure dashed down an embankment into a gully and then into the woods beyond. So John Baxter decided to run after it, but when he arrived to the near side of the gully, he could see that there was this 3.5-foot tall creature that had this big head with these glowing orange eyes and pale skin with these spindly fingers gripping onto a tree. And in that moment, he realized that this was a bad situation, so he ran back up to the street. And thankfully, there was a car passing by that wound up pulling over to give him a ride home, because who knows what that thing would have done. Now, the following night, another teenager was driving through Dover and claimed to see a strange creature lurking on the side of the road, which matched the previous descriptions from the night before. This 3.5-foot tall, big-headed, large-eyed creature that just seemed totally alien. Now, the sightings caused a media frenzy, and the creature was dubbed the Dover Demon, of course, but after those 2 nights, it was never seen again. Skeptics who've looked into this case believe that this was simply just a lost baby moose, but with 3 different sightings, all describing the same skinny humanoid creature, as well as the time of year that this was, there shouldn't have been baby moose around in April, according to the data that's out there. I could be wrong, but maybe there was something else going on back then. Next up is Rhode Island. Now, in the waters off the coast of Rhode Island lies Block Island, where it's said that an unknown sea creature lurks, the Block Ness Monster. The stories about the Block Ness Monster are interestingly much more recent, historically speaking, than a lot of the cryptids on this list. It started in 1996 when a group of fishermen hauled up this 14-foot long carcass of some unknown animal off of Block Island. Its body was described as having a long spear-like head, fleshy whiskers, a serpentine body, and it was covered in thick leathery skin. Now, news of this mystery creature spread, and it was hailed as evidence of one of the sea monsters of legend. The remains of this creature were entrusted to a local biologist for study, but bizarrely, the specimen suddenly vanished from the freezer it was being stored in. Rumors floated around speculating that a rival scientist stole them, or even the government was looking to cover up this discovery for some reason. And the ocean is massive, with a lot of it still being unexplored, of course, and uncharted. So perhaps there are some creatures down there still waiting to be discovered. Just think of the giant squid that was largely thought to just be a legend until the early 2000s when one was finally documented and filmed. And perhaps this was a known creature and it just was unidentifiable because it was so decayed. But from what I understand, no one could really identify what exactly it was. So this one remains a mystery. Moving on, we've got the state of Connecticut. Now, the legend here is a little bit creepy. which is about the black dog of Hanging Hills. And I thought about doing melonheads for this one, but when you look into the story of melonheads, they're not really cryptids exactly, and I figured that something like this would be a little bit more fun. So in south central Connecticut, there are the Hanging Hills, which is a series of volcanic rock ridges that formed around 200 million years ago. So there's a lot of old stuff going on here. Now, near the town of Meriden, there's this recreational area called Hubbard Park, which contains this 51-mile-long nature trail called the Metacomet Trail. And while it's home to flower gardens and even a lake, it's also said to be haunted by this spectral hound, the black dog of Hanging Hills. And stories of this hound date back to the late 1800s, when this geologist, only known by the initials FS, was doing research in the Hanging Hills area. One day, he was followed by this strange black dog. Now, the animal never made a sound or a track in the dirt, and as the sun was beginning to set, this dog seemed to vanish into thin air. So what was this thing? Now, a couple years later, FS returned with a colleague of his, a man named Herbert Marshall. Marshall had been out to the Hanging Hills before and had encountered this hound, so he was aware of this weird mystery dog. And after spending a day or two in the Hanging Hills area, they encountered the dog yet again. Shortly after, while they were up on this cliff face, Herbert Marshall fell to his death. Now, FS didn't return to the Hanging Hills for about 3 years after that incident, but when he went in one more time for another round of research, he wasn't heard from again. That is, until his body was found, having plummeted to his death from the same exact spot that Herbert Marshall fell from before. Now, some speculate that he potentially saw the black dog of Hanging Hills again. So was this cryptid dog a harbinger of doom? Was it a hellhound? No one knows for sure, but many believe that this story was maybe a work of fiction. However, every once in a while, somebody who is out on the trail occasionally encounters this mystery black dog. So maybe there is something going on with this story. All right, next up is the state of New York. So back in the 1960s in Chautauqua County, near the small town of Sherman, there were apparently sightings of these massive creatures that came to be known as the White Monsters of Sherman. According to an eyewitness who was a young boy at the time, he and his family would be kind of harassed on their home property by this pair of colossal white-furred creatures. The boy wrote a letter to the late great author and high strangeness investigator John Keel all about his sightings, and what he described to Keel was basically a species of megafauna. These things traveled on all fours but could also stand on their hind legs, reaching 12 to 18 feet up into the trees when they were trying to forage for food, and they had these massive sloth-like claws and long, thick tails. Occasionally, they were seen with juveniles as well, which suggests that they were potentially a breeding pair. Now, these descriptions closely resemble that of a type of species that went extinct a long time ago, something like Megatherium, the giant ground sloth, or rather Megalonyx, which is North America's version of the giant ground sloth. So could this species still be surviving today in isolated pockets in remote wilderness areas? It's pretty interesting to think about, and might even be plausible, but let me know what you think in the comments. Next up is the state of New Jersey, and of course we're talking about the Jersey Devil. This guy is one of the most famous cryptids in the US, and its legend has haunted the Pine Barrens and beyond for almost 300 years. And you can check out my deep dive podcast episode about the Jersey Devil, but the short of it is this. In the 1730s, there was this woman known as Mother Leeds who was pregnant with her 13th child, and she cursed it to be the devil. It was a stormy night when the child was finally born at the family home in the Pine Barrens, and soon after, it transformed into this devilish creature, whipping its tail at everyone in the room before flying out through the chimney. And in some versions, it says that it actually killed everyone in the room before flying out of the chimney and haunting the Pine Barrens and greater New Jersey ever since. Now, the Jersey Devil is said to be a bit of a chimera, having the body of a kangaroo or a goat, the head of a horse or goat as well, bat-like wings, cloven hooves, and a forked tail. And some even reported that it could breathe fire, so some speculate that there could be a dragging component to this thing as well. And according to the legends, the Jersey Devil has been blamed for livestock killings, strange tracks, and eerie noises throughout the Pine Barrens for generations. Now, the largest flap of sightings occurred in January 1909, where several towns throughout New Jersey, Maryland, even into Pennsylvania, Delaware, upstate New York, there were all these mass sightings of the Jersey Devil. And despite numerous sightings and investigations over the years, the true nature of the Jersey Devil still remains a bit of a mystery. But there's a lot of really cool folklore and history to this story. So again, you should definitely check out my deep dive podcast episode if you haven't before. Moving down to Delaware, we have the story of a swamp creature that's been said to lurk there for decades, the Selbyville Swamp Monster. Now, this cryptid first gained notoriety in the 1960s when motorists would be shocked by the sight of this hairy humanoid on the side of the road going through Delaware's Great Cypress Swamp. It was often described as a Bigfoot-looking creature, and many people also reported seeing it holding what looked like a baseball bat with a nail driven through it, which is really weird. There was even this photo taken of the alleged creature that made the front page of the local newspaper on April 23rd, 1964, which prompted a monster hunt to find this cryptid. And of course, nobody ever found it, but as it turns out, the editor of the Delmarva News, Ralph Grapperhaus, and his friend Fred Stevens confessed to dressing up as the monster to scare people decades after keeping this a secret. I believe it was in the 1980s that happened. However, even after this admission, reports of the Selbyville Swamp Monster continued, with witnesses describing a large hairy creature with a terrible odor lurking out there. Some accounts even surfaced from the 1920s of such encounters with a similar creature, decades before Grapperhaus and Stevens concocted their hoax. But whether it was a hoax, a misidentified animal, or something more, the story of the Selbyville Swamp Monster has definitely cemented its place in Delaware folklore. Next up is Pennsylvania, where we get to talk about some fearsome critter folklore. Now, according to these old lumberjack legends in the hemlock forests of Pennsylvania, there's said to be a creature that's as strange as it is pitiful. This is the story of the squonk. Now, it was first written about in the book Fearsome Critters of the Lumberwoods by William T. Cox in 1910. This cryptid is described as a small creature with wrinkled, ill-fitting skin, and it's covered in warts and blemishes. It's often shown as being of the swine family, basically a kind of pig-like creature. And it has this perpetually sad expression, and it's known for its habit of constantly crying because of being self-aware of just how hideous it is. And according to the legend, the squonk is also so ashamed of its appearance that it'll hide from anyone being able to see it, even hiding from itself. Like, it avoids puddles of water that are clear enough to produce a reflection. And if it's ever seen or caught, it's said that it would dissolve into a puddle of its own tears. Now, the story of the squonk dates back to the 1910s, of course, and has become a beloved part of Pennsylvania folklore. So this is just a really silly kind of story, and some people believe that it's just a figment of the imagination, and others think that there might truly be something strange and pitiful lurking in the forests of Pennsylvania, but likely it's just a lumberjack's tall tale. Next up is the state of Maryland, which is said to be home of a very wild flying cryptid called the snallygaster. According to the legend, this is a kind of dragon-like chimera, just a basic menace that can be found in the mountains in and around Frederick County. The snallygaster is described as this large winged creature with sharp talons, a singular eye on its forehead. Some reports say it has tentacles kind of coming out of its mouth or out of the side of its head, and it has this metallic beak and these razor sharp claws, and its screech was also said to sound like a train whistle. Totally nightmare fuel. Now, the origin of this legend dates back to the early 1700s when German immigrants brought tales of this creature to the New World. Its name derives from the German phrase Schnellergeist, which means quick spirit. And over the centuries, stories spread of this creature swooping down on unsuspecting prey, carrying off livestock, pets, and even people. And at one point, it was said that the Smithsonian offered a reward for the capture of the snallygaster, and even President Teddy Roosevelt had considered hunting this mythical beast. And in an interesting piece of history about this whole thing is that local residents of Frederick County and beyond adopted the practice of painting 7-pointed stars on their barns, as it was believed to ward off the snallygaster. And some of these stars can still be seen today on barns all throughout Maryland. Interestingly, in 1909, shortly after the flap of Jersey Devil sightings, many people in Maryland as well as Virginia also reported seeing some enormous flying beast that looked like it had claws that were like steel hooks, along with a long pointed bill and a single eye in the center of its forehead. So some people think there could have been a potential connection between the Jersey Devil and the snallygaster at that point in time. Some even claim to find giant eggs from this creature, suggesting that there may have been more than one. However, the last alleged sighting happened after a snallygaster flew over a moonshine still and fell into it. The authorities were called to take the creature away, but instead they apparently blew it up with dynamite, erasing any evidence of this legendary cryptid. Now, I also have a deep dive podcast episode all about the snallygaster. It was one of my very early episodes for the podcast, so definitely check that out. Next up is Virginia. Not only is Virginia for lovers, but it's also for cryptids, of course. So this state is the home of the Chesapeake Bay Monster, or Chessie for short. And according to the witness accounts and the local legends, this is an aquatic cryptid that resides in the waters of the Chesapeake Bay, which also goes up into Maryland, but we're talking about this for Virginia, of course. Now, it's been described as being a kind of serpentine creature with a long, sinuous body, a horse-like head, and it also has flippers. It's said to be very quick and agile, easily gliding through the water. Many have equated Chessie and other lake and sea monsters to being a surviving species of dinosaur, like a plesiosaur or something similar. However, there isn't really any proof of that being the case just yet. The origin of when people first started seeing this creature is unclear, but the first written accounts of Chessie appear in 1936. There was this story of a military helicopter flying over the bay back then in 1936, and its crew said they spotted a sea serpent in the bay below. However, this account is likely just made up, since the first helicopter flight didn't actually happen until 1939, hundreds of miles away in Connecticut. However, over the course of the 20th century, witnesses continued to come forward saying that there was some unknown creature living out in the bay. One prominent sighting in 1978 described the creature being spotted near the Potomac River, and then there was another witness in 1980 named Trudy Guthrie, who drew what she saw, claiming that it was Chessie, and what she drew very much resembled a manatee. So perhaps some manatees found their way up from Florida, and that's what people have been seeing all these years. Or perhaps there's something else out there that hasn't been discovered yet. Moving down the coast brings us to North Carolina, and this is the story of the Beast of Bladenboro. Back in 1950, in the small town of Bladenboro, there was a mystery creature that was massacring tons of livestock and pets out of nowhere. This happened around Christmas time in 1950 and into New Year's of 1951. Those who managed to spot this elusive creature described it as basically a large black cat with red eyes. Some believed it was vampiric, as it was said to drain the blood of its victims, and it would leave its victims' carcasses behind, which has led some to believe and speculate that it could have been something like a chupacabra. One woman even had a face-off with this creature while she was walking out of her home to drive her car into town one morning. There was this massive cat-like creature growling at her, ready to pounce, until her husband came out, which startled the creature and caused it to retreat back into the woods. And because of the damage this creature was causing, a massive hunt ensued. Eventually, a bobcat was found and culled, and the livestock and pet attacks seemed to stop. However, a bobcat didn't really fit the description of what people were seeing, so some believed that the Beast of Bladenboro was still at large. And then, decades later, in 2007, a series of new livestock killings began around Bladenboro County in different towns, prompting some to believe that the beast, or one of its offspring, may have returned. Now, there's not much other information following up on that story from 2007, so hopefully whatever it was moved on. Next up is the state of South Carolina. Now, this state has a pretty terrifying cryptid story. So, there is a swamp area in South Carolina that's said to be home of a reptilian cryptid known as the lizard man of Scape Ore Swamp. Now, it's basically described as a large bipedal reptilian creature with green, scaly skin and glowing red eyes. And it's also outfitted with sharp teeth and claws, of course. Now, the lizard man first gained notoriety in the late 1980s when a series of strange attacks were attributed to the creature, the most famous of which happened on the evening of June 29th, 1988, when a teenager named Chris Davis was driving home from work when he got a flat tire right out near the swamp. Chris was finishing up putting on the spare tire when he suddenly heard this thumping noise in the marshy field across the road from where he was, and it was getting louder and closer. So naturally, he turned to look and see what it was, and he saw this unknown creature. It was this tall, scaly reptilian humanoid, and it was barreling right towards him, and it looked angry. So Chris was terrified and jumped into his car as fast as he could, and just as he slammed the door shut, he heard and felt this lizard man grab onto the trunk. So like in any horror movie, Chris starts the car and starts to drive off, but not before he hears a loud thud on the roof of his car. And of course, it was the lizard man who had jumped up there and started clinging onto the roof of the car. So Chris started swerving wildly and speeding up faster, and thankfully this maneuver eventually caused the lizard man to be thrown off. And from there, it probably retreated back into the swamp. And when Chris arrived home, his car was just messed up. There was damage to the side view mirror, there were scratches and dents all over the roof and the trunk. And when he brought his car into the police department to report the incident, they couldn't explain what could have made those marks on his car. And since then, several other witnesses have had their cars attacked or have seen the creature as recently as 2017. And if you park in or near the swamp, a lot of people say that the lizard man will come out and mess your car up. So probably you want to avoid that area if you can. Next up is Georgia. Now, according to the legend for this state, in the murky waters of the Altamaha River, there's said to be another aquatic cryptid, the river monster known as the Altamaha, or Alti for short. So Alti is described as a large serpent-like creature with a long sturgeon-like body, 2 front flippers, and a tail. Some have said that it has the snout of a crocodile with large protruding eyes, large sharp teeth, but it also swims like a dolphin. Its coloring is said to be gray or green on top with a whitish yellow underbelly and can be anywhere from 20 to 30 feet long. The first modern reports of Alti date back to newspaper articles from 1830, but legends of it date back well before colonial times and can be found in Native American folklore dating back millennia. It's said to inhabit the myriad of waterways and tributaries of this part of Georgia, which is actually one of the largest river basins in North America, second only to that of the Mississippi River. So there's tons of areas for some unknown creature to be able to hide out in. Sightings of some mystery water cryptid still happen down there today, although it's thought that it's likely just a misidentified dolphin or manatee, which I could totally see based on the description. So perhaps that's all it is, or maybe there is some unknown creature that lives in this area. Finishing up on the East Coast and moving on to the Gulf Coast is the state of Florida. Now, Florida is said to be home of the infamous skunk ape, which is Bigfoot's smaller and stinkier cousin. Although sightings happen all throughout the state and beyond for skunk apes, it's primarily said to be found in the Everglades National Park. Some of the earliest sightings date back to the 1960s and 70s around Dade County, where witnesses claim to see a hairy, tall humanoid ape creature that was typically preceded by its horrendous smell. One of the most famous sightings with photographic evidence for the skunk ape occurred in the year 2000 when a woman who lived near the Myakka River sent photos to the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office. She sent a note with the pictures saying that she believed that this animal was just an escaped orangutan which had been raiding food from her back porch. And if real, it certainly looks like it's some kind of great ape, definitely resembling an orangutan. And after the photos circulated out to the public, many cryptid enthusiasts believe that this was the smoking gun evidence to prove that skunk ape exists. And then there's also Dave Shealy's footage from that same year that appears to show a skunk ape or a Bigfoot type creature walking through this marshy area with relative ease, which it's argued that a person would have a lot of trouble going through this area. Now, Dave is a self-proclaimed skunk ape expert who claims to have encountered these creatures multiple times starting when he was just a kid. And now he runs the Skunk Ape Research Headquarters. And while skeptics argue that skunk ape is nothing more than a bear or just a hoax, the skunk ape remains a beloved and terrifying part of Florida's folklore. Now we're going to go through the Deep South, starting with Alabama. So there are a number of legends and creatures found in this state, but one creature stands out, and it's known only as the White Thing. It's described as a 7 to 8 foot tall humanoid with shaggy white fur and glowing red eyes. The White Thing has been spotted all throughout Alabama since the early 1900s, but primarily it's said to be found in the northern parts of the state, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, primarily between Morgan, Jefferson, and Etowah counties. Skeptics will say it's just something like a bear, but many believe it could be something like an albino Bigfoot. And interestingly, many reports have described the White Thing with an almost kangaroo-like tail and more feline-like features in its face, which does not sound Bigfoot-like. And it also has these cat-like ears. So could we be looking at a type of Catman humanoid monster instead? Next up is Mississippi and the story of the Pascagoula River aliens, or they're also known as the Pascagoula Elephant Men. This story starts out in 1973 in the town of Pascagoula, Mississippi, which became the site of one of the most famous alien abduction cases in history. And I don't necessarily classify aliens as cryptids per se, but this story is just so huge that I couldn't not include it. So the story goes that two co-workers, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker, claimed that they were fishing on the Pascagoula River one night when they suddenly heard this whizzing sound. Moments later, they saw this oval-shaped craft with flashing blue lights descending out of the sky towards them. Then these three beings reportedly came out of a hatch on the craft and floated towards them. Charles and Calvin said they were paralyzed with fear. The creatures were described as having this elephant-like skin. Their heads were devoid of facial features, and they didn't even really have a neck. The only things that they had on their heads were these long protrusions where the ears and nose would be on a human. Their legs were seemingly fused together and almost formed a kind of lobster tail-like look to it. And their arms ended in these claw-like appendages. Now, the aliens then levitated Calvin and Charles into their craft, and they were subjected to a bizarre series of medical examinations before being returned to the riverbank. The two men immediately went to file a police report, and unbeknownst to them, Calvin and Charles were actually already being recorded while they were waiting for an officer to come in and take their statement. And in the recording, they sounded genuinely terrified as to what had just transpired. Now, this case gained national attention, and despite skepticism over 50 years, Calvin and Charles, who have both since passed away, never wavered in their story, and this incident remains one of the most well-documented and mysterious alien encounters in the United States. Next up is the state of Louisiana, and it's here that it's said there is a creature to be found that's as feared as it is legendary, the rougarou, which is a variation on the French name for these werewolf-type creatures, loup-garou. This is essentially the Cajun version of a werewolf, which roams the swamps around Acadiana and greater New Orleans, hunting for its next victim. Now, the legend of the rougarou is rooted in French folklore, brought over by settlers and adapted to the swamps of Louisiana. According to the tale, the rougarou is actually a human that's cursed by a witch who transforms into the beast at night, but unlike a normal werewolf, it doesn't have to be during a full moon. During the day, it turns back into a human. However, the human appears quite sickly and avoids people as to not rouse suspicion of it secretly being a rougarou and then being killed. One of the main things that the rougarou is known for is hunting down Catholics who break Lent or commit other sins. And interestingly, one of the ways a person can become a rougarou is if they break Lent for 7 years in a row. It's believed that in order to ward off a rougarou, one must leave a pile of 13 objects on their front doorstep, and in doing so, a rougarou is compelled to sit down and count all of the objects. But it can't count past 13, and it gets confused, so it repeats the process until sunrise, which is when it needs to retreat back into the swamps before transforming back into its human form. And it's said that the only way to break the curse is to survive for 101 days. And you also have to be able to find a person willing to take on the curse from you, or you need to draw the blood of someone by attacking them, which doesn't really sound all that hard if you're a werewolf type creature, right? Now we're going to jump up to Arkansas, which is said to be the home of a creature known as the Ozark Howler. And this is a pretty cool cryptid that also has a few different names, like the hoo-hoo, the nightshade bear, and the devil cat. And sightings of this cryptid allegedly date back to the days of Daniel Boone, who was said to have encountered one of these things. It's described as being bear-sized, with black shaggy hair, stocky legs, glowing red eyes, and horns on its head. And according to the legend, it's called the Howler for a reason, as its cry is this kind of combination of a wolf, an elk, and a hyena. Some think it may be an unrecognized species of big cat, or even something like a solo transient black panther. Others think that it might just be a misidentified animal like the American red wolf, but it's also been speculated that it could be a species thought to have gone extinct around 5 million years ago, a creodont species known as the bear dog, which were apex predators of their day. Although I like this idea, but it's probably pretty unlikely, seeing as how many million years have passed. But then again, there was also the white beasts of Sherman, which were thought to be an extinct species of megafauna as well. And there's another theory that suggests that the Ozark Howler could actually be a hellhound of sorts, as the folklore surrounding it often describes them as a bad omen or a harbinger of death. And interestingly, there is an alleged strange connection with, yet again, Teddy Roosevelt and the creation of the national park systems in the early 1900s. Back then, there was this organization of lumber barons that was created called the Concatenated Order of the Hoo-Hoo, which some believe hides secrets within our national parks, namely the Ozark Howler for this case, which is sometimes called the hoo-hoo, in order to preserve the rare animal or any other mystery animal they're trying to hide there. Next up is Oklahoma, and specifically something that's said to reside in its man-made lakes, the Oklahoma octopus. And this one is pretty straightforward. It's basically described as a giant octopus-like cephalopod with a body that's as big as a horse with long tentacles and reddish skin. Some say that this cryptid lurks in the depths of the state's lakes, including Lake Thunderbird, Lake Ulaga, and Lake Tenkiller. And according to this local legend, this creature is often said to be responsible for the numerous drownings and disappearances that have happened over the years in these lakes. Although many of these unfortunate incidents can be explained by people being irresponsible, unfortunately. But despite that, over the years, some locals have actually claimed to have seen massive tentacles shooting out of the water, pulling down unsuspecting people to a watery grave. Now, it's unlikely that an octopus would be living in a freshwater lake since they're saltwater creatures, much less something of this purported size. And even though that's the case, there was once a common octopus actually found surviving in Lake Conway over in Arkansas for a brief period of time before being caught. That one was likely just a released exotic pet and probably wouldn't have survived much longer if it hadn't been captured and relocated. But it's interesting to note that an octopus could potentially survive for at least a little while in a freshwater lake. But in the end, this one's probably highly unlikely. Alright, on to the next, which happens to be the state of Texas. The cryptid for Texas is the Lake Worth monster, which made several appearances in the summer of 1969. This creature was said to be found around Lake Worth in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Witnesses described seeing this humanoid goat-like creature, almost like a satyr from ancient Greek folklore. This goat man was said to be around 7 feet tall, with white fur, horns on its head, and some even say that it looked like it had scales, suggesting it had some kind of aquatic nature to it. According to people who encountered this thing, they said that it had a knack for showing up around lovers' lanes where couples would be parked and it would come out of the woodwork to terrorize them, which is a common story among goatman type cryptids. There was one witness, a man named John Reichert, who had heard the stories of the Lake Worth monster and decided to go investigate one evening by himself. And as he was driving down one of the roads that followed the lake, the creature suddenly dropped down from a large tree branch and landed on the hood of his car. This caused Reichert to speed off and lose the monster. Later on, the authorities couldn't identify what caused the damage to his hood, so it remained a mystery. Shortly after, there was a group of people who were hanging out at the lake that witnessed this monster up an embankment, and it suddenly picked up and threw this tire down at them, and they all scattered, being terrified that this just happened. And later that year, in October, there was a photographer named Alan Plaster who took this photo near Lake Worth, claiming that it was the monster. You can't really make out too much other than it looks like this kind of white furry blob or humanoid type of thing. Maybe it's the monster, but we're not sure exactly. Now, decades later, a group of people who were high school students at the time came forward and claimed to have actually hoaxed the Lake Worth monster that summer, dressing up in a gorilla costume and even tossing that tire down at people to scare them. The only problem with that is that sightings continued after that summer, such as Alan Plaster's sighting and his picture of the alleged creature. So while we may have some answers for some of the sightings in this case, there may still be a mystery creature, a goatman type thing, lurking in the area. Next up is New Mexico, which many claim to have seen what they call thunderbirds or teratorns, basically prehistoric giant birds akin to giant condors. Those who have claimed to see these mystery birds often speak of a massive wingspan that could cover an entire road. Some believe that these may be connected to the Native American legends of thunderbirds. Now, in 2003, outside of Las Cruces, New Mexico, a man named Dave Zander was hiking in the Doña Ana Mountains when he saw something that he couldn't quite explain. What he saw was two very large creatures perched up on the side of a nearby mountain. Zander said they were so large that it looked like they could be the size of small planes like Cessnas. Suddenly, one of them jumped and dive-bombed down the mountainside, and within a moment, it spread out its wings, which he said had to be at least a 20-foot span. He could see that it was covered in all black feathers, and it had this vulture-like head as it flew off. So perhaps these flying monstrosities are real after all. Next up in the American Southwest is the state of Arizona. You might not think there's much going on there because of the vast desert, but in the ponderosa pine forest that cut through the middle of the state, known as the Mogollon Rim, there are legends of a creature that's called the Mogollon Monster. This cryptid is basically another type of Bigfoot. It's said to be over 7 feet tall, with reddish brown to black hair all over its body. And it also has large red eyes and a horrendous smell, of course. Now, one of the earliest reports comes from a 1903 Arizona Republican newspaper article written by an I.W. Stevens, saying that the Mogollon Monster was described as this fearsome beast. Allegedly, I.W. Stevens encountered it while exploring near the Grand Canyon, which, yes, isn't in the Mogollon Rim, but I'll mention a story or two from there in just a minute. This one is definitely important to the lore of this monster. So basically, this article states that while hiking, Stevens came across the grisly scene of this hairy humanoid creature feasting on a pair of dead cougars. And when it saw Stevens, it picked up a club and chased after him, and all the while letting out this unearthly screech. Now, as he was trying to make his escape, another mountain lion jumped out of the bush and started attacking the Mogollon Monster, which gave Stevens enough time to actually escape with his life. Now, as stories that actually took place in the Mogollon Rim. In the 1940s, there was a man named Don Davis, who at the time was in the Boy Scouts, and he was on a camping trip with his troop outside of Payson in Tonto Creek. One night during this trip, he woke up to this awful smell permeating the camp, and he heard what sounded like something pretty big rummaging through his fellow campers' belongings. It was dark, so he called out to whoever or whatever it was messing with them, and he could see this silhouette of this figure stand up, and it was massive. It was over 7 feet tall. It then walked over to him while he was in his sleeping bag and just stared at him for about a minute before wandering off into the forest. Davis described it as having this expressionless ape-like face with deep-set eyes. Sounds a lot like a Bigfoot to me. There was also another campfire story that would get told about a man who was a camp counselor getting defaced by the Mogollon monster. Again, with a lot of cryptids on this list, I do have episodes about them, and I do have a deep dive all about the Mogollon monster on my podcast, so definitely check that episode out as well. All right, we're halfway through. Thank you so much for sticking around to this point. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel here for more on cryptids, folklore, ancient mysteries, the paranormal, and more. And make sure to check out my Patreon if you want to support what I do and get some great membership perks. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So now we're in the state of California, which is the home of the Fresno nightcrawlers. These things were first spotted on a CCTV security system one night in the city of Fresno, and this strange creature has garnered quite the fan base and also has a series of mostly unsuccessful debunks of the original footage, which I find very interesting. The story goes that one evening, a man named Jose woke up to his dog barking, and he went to go check on his security camera monitor, as there had been a recent string of vandalism and people messing around in his neighborhood. He wanted to make sure that his home and his family were safe. And instead of people, he sees what looks like this odd creature going across his front lawn. Jose then takes a camcorder video of what's happening on his security monitor, because if he rewinds it, the footage would be automatically erased. Now, after a lot of hesitation, he finally brought the camcorder tape to the local Univision station. And this was a while between when the initial sighting happened and when he actually took this to a TV station. And from there, the footage on the viewing monitor that he put his tape in was recorded by yet another camcorder, which is why the footage that's available looks so bad. Now, Jose died a few years later, unfortunately, so we'll never know the full story behind this footage. However, in 2011, these creatures were allegedly filmed yet again in Yosemite National Park, and this video is much more clear. However, there was a Reddit post recently where someone claimed to have been a CGI artist and was actually responsible for creating the footage as a hoax as part of some kind of viral marketing campaign. But if you want to know a lot more about the Fresno Nightcrawler, make sure to check out my deep dive podcast episode all about them here on my channel or your favorite podcasting platform. Well, that was a long one, and there are certainly a lot of legends of strange creatures out there, so stick around for part 2, where I'll be covering the cryptids for the last 25 states in the US. And thanks so much again for hanging out with me today. My name is Jeff, and this is Strangeology. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a comment, like, subscribe, share, and hit the bell icon to make sure that you never miss a new episode. And if there's a story you want to hear about, or you have your own story you want to share, or have kind words to say, please head on over to strangeology.com/contact, or you can send me a message on social media. Speaking of which, don't forget to follow me on all of my socials as well. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, Threads, and you can sometimes see day-to-day things that I do, memes, short videos, or even get notified when I host giveaways. And don't forget that Strangeology is also a podcast. I post episodes here on my channel, but you can listen to them on any podcasting platform out there if you're looking for deep dives into Fortean topics or interviews with authors, researchers, and experts who deal with the strange and unexplained. I do my best to keep to a bi-weekly release schedule, but with more support from you all out there, I can kick things up a notch and crank out more content. That said, if you're wondering how to support this channel, you can do so by becoming a member over at patreon.com/strangeology. And you can join for as little as $1 per month. Higher tiers equals more benefits and perks like early access to new videos and podcast episodes, which are ad-free, as well as access to Strangeology Beyond, which is the members-only portion of the show. There's also shoutouts, exclusive merch like this t-shirt here, and discounts to my online store. There's even a t-shirt of the month club and more. So if you want to check that out again, it's patreon.com patreon.com/strangeology. And thank you so much to all of my members who help keep the lights on here at Strangeology HQ. You are so appreciated for the continued support. Also, if you enjoy discussing the strange and unexplained and want to be part of a growing community of like-minded people talking about and sharing topics like this and more for free, you can join my Discord server at discord.io/strangeology. And then there's my merch. I've also got merch linked down below here on the channel, but I have even more available on my Etsy shop. I've got a wide range of cryptid, alien, and otherwise Fortean designs on things like t-shirts, tank tops, sweatshirts, mugs, stickers, pins, blankets, magnets, posters, and more. I do all my own artwork, and you can check that out at strangeology.etsy.com to grab something for yourself or someone you know who loves the strange and unexplained. Alright, that's all from me for now. Until the next time, make sure to take care of yourselves and each other, and keep it strange.